Hey guys, Toby Mathis here. Today we're going to talk about why every American still needs a trust. Now, a lot of you guys probably have parents or somebody that you know that has said, I just need a will. And I don't begrudge them. I get it. It's better than nothing because there's really only three options. But I'm going to make a very strong argument that those days are gone. We don't need to be doing that anymore. It's so simple to put together a way to avoid probate and the whole court process, and it's really in your best interest. And especially if you are the child of somebody who's talking about, hey, I just need that will. Here's some arguments that you can go and say, please, mom or dad, please put something in place. And that's because we all have three choices. Three choices are really come down to do nothing. We can do a will, or we can do a trust. And by trust, I mean a living trust. So I'm not going to talk about any fancy, crazy trust, but just a simple, plain vanilla grantor trust, inter vivos trust called a living trust. And that just means, hey, it's my suitcase that holds all my stuff so that if something happens to me, rather than having to go to a judge, like just imagine, I want you to visualize you're carrying all of your clothing down the street, and something happens to you. What happens to your clothes? It ends up in the street, right? And somebody has to go through and says, all right, who gets, this shirt, and who gets these pants, who gets this dress? Well, a court has to do it. So when you're looking at one or two, these both require a court because there's no suitcase. Like if you do nothing, it's called intestate. So I died intestate. When you read about Prince, he passed away intestate, right? Which means the state's laws are what dictate who gets his assets. It's horrible. You have to go through a probate process. Probate simply means court. So probate equals and we want to avoid court. There's not a lot of good stuff that happens in courthouses. If you never have to go inside of a courthouse, you didn't miss anything. Right? We want to avoid having to go in front of judges. It's expensive, it's time consuming. You have to do these motions, you have to fill this stuff out. It makes you anxious. It usually causes fights because people start saying, why are we in court? What did you file? And then they go talk to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, oh, you need to have representation. You need to be asserting your rights. And that is fancy way of saying pay the lawyer a lot of money to fight. We want to avoid that. And these top two, they automatically go into probate. Now, some lawyers are going to say, but you have a small estate. Not a big deal. Fantastic, it's not a big deal for you, but I tell you what, for anybody who's ever had to do it, when somebody passed away and has to learn how to do paperwork and has to call a lawyer and has to deal with this, it's something. It's not nothing. It's definitely something, and we want to avoid it if at all humanly possible, just because there's a price tag on the emotional toil and the time and the energy. And by the way, there's multiple parties, but the AARP did a study on estates, and it was about 20% of the estate was being used up in probate fees of having to go through and pay the lawyer, the court, the appraisals, all that fun stuff that gets sucked apart in court. And we're not talking about just big estates. We're talking about a typical estate. If you're in California, for example, you get a magic 8% automatically on the smaller estate. And you can't sell things for a while, and there's all sorts of public disclosure and all this fun stuff. So I say we really don't want to do 1 and 2 if we can avoid it. And the easy way to avoid it is using a trust. So let's go back to our example. I am carrying a whole bunch of clothing. Would you ever travel the world carrying your clothes in your arms? Like instead of using a suitcase, I'm just going to carry everything with me. I mean, let's just assume that the airlines even allowed you to do that. Would that be a good idea? No, because what happens? Stuff drops everywhere, right? It's really tough to do. It's difficult. It's annoying. It's frustrating. And everybody can see your laundry. Everybody could see your dirty laundry, depending on how long you've been traveling. So all a living trust is a fancy way of saying we put it all in a suitcase. And during my life, I am in control of that suitcase. There's 3 parties in a living trust. There's the grantor, the person who created it. There's the trustee, the person who's carrying that suitcase and opens it up, according to directions, and takes things out. and there's the beneficiary, the person who receives whatever it is that's inside that suitcase. Maybe it's clothing, maybe it's cash, whatever it might be, right? It's inside that little suitcase. That's it. And we just have a document that says, hey, here's who's in charge of the suitcase. It's actually really simple. We don't need a judge to tell us who's in charge of the suitcase, because during your lifetime you have the trust. And all that happens is, hey, if I'm incapacitated, if I can no longer carry my own suitcase, if I'm not able to or I'm not willing to, and I don't want to figure out who gets what. Like during my lifetime, it's pretty easy. I am the one who gets everything out of the suitcase. But if I can no longer carry it, I can no, like maybe I'm not competent anymore, it says, here's the successor. Usually my spouse, usually then somebody after that, probably a family member, somebody, a trusted advisor, somebody you know. And then we could go down farther and say like, hey, maybe an institution, maybe a bank's department, a trust department. And there, or maybe it's Uncle Ned, you know, who knows? It's just I get to choose who's in charge, or I give a convention. And if I don't, guess what? The beneficiaries get to decide. So if I pass away and my spouse was the only other trustee and they predeceased me, there's going to be a convention. Hey, beneficiaries, you guys got to elect a trustee, and it has to be a fiduciary. It needs to be a lawyer, an accountant, or a licensed fiduciary, a trust company. Okay, we're going to pick this one. Great. And then they follow your directions on who gets what out of that suitcase. Let's talk about how that might work. Generally speaking, there's 4 ways that could actually happen on how you have your estate distributed. Some people just say, just give it to my kids, or just give it to so-and-so. That's called an outright distribution. Some people say, give it to my kids, but at ages. Maybe it's when they're 40 or when they're 50, give them a portion. So I might say, hey, 25% at 40, 25% at 50, the rest when they're 60. That doesn't mean they don't get anything in between. It just means that they don't have a right to your corpus of all the stuff that's in there. So imagine it's a suitcase, and let's imagine that there's $1 million in it. It just means they can't go in and take the $1 million willy-nilly. You may have instructions to your trustee that says, hey, give them money if they need it for health, education, maintenance, or to support themselves. Hey, I have a granddaughter, she's going to college, there's money in there to help them pay for education. Fantastic. Hey, my kid, they got sick, and hey, they need medical procedure, they need $10,000. It's there, it's already sitting there for their benefit. Hey, their support, they lost their job, maybe they're on strike, maybe they're suffering and their house is going into foreclosure. Hey, here's money so that they don't go into foreclosure, here's money to help. And you could put a whole bunch of other things in there if you want, like, hey, I really want you to travel the world, so here's money every year so that you can leave the United States and travel to another country and get some culture. Right? There's all those things in that trust. So you might put that in there. Maybe you're putting it over time. Hey, I want them to get equal distributions of that $1 million that's sitting in there, but maybe it's $50,000 a year. Or maybe it's, hey, you know what? I really want to keep my estate together, my $1 million, and I'll provide you with money if you need it under health, education, maintenance, and support, and that's it. You don't have a right to go take my $1 million. But if you need it, you can go to the trustee and ask them for funds if you need it for those purposes. So again, somebody needs to go to school, fantastic. That sounds like a good need. Somebody's having trouble making ends meet, fantastic. The money's there to help them. But it stays together otherwise. And let me explain why this is important. When you are up here, let's say that you are a real estate investor, and we're talking about carrying our clothes. When you have real estate, it's not as simple as just what I have in my arms. I have real estate in multiple jurisdictions. I actually have to go probate anywhere that I hold real estate in my name. It becomes pretty darn frustrating and very expensive. My family, I dealt with this. We actually gave up 2 lots for my grandma because it was more expensive to probate it than it was just to it was more than the lots were worth. And we literally let them go back to the state. My dad did, because he was like, oh my God, the lawyers were crazy on what they wanted and what they were going to charge. These were just little lots that were worth a few $1,000 a piece. And that's not what my grandma intended. So I always look at it and going, gosh darn it, somebody talked to her. She managed to put together that will, and nobody thought about like, hey, you know what? It's not going to be worth it. The probate costs out of state to fly there, to hire the lawyer, to do all that stuff was more than the lots were worth. And nobody explained that to my grandma. So she went through that process. And I'm sure there's a lot of you guys who are sitting out there who have parents that are in the same scenario. Hey, I talked to my lawyer. They said trusts are for rich people. No, they're not. They're for everybody. And here's the thing. I am just talking about passing away. I am not even getting into what happens during your lifetime. So remember I was talking about you carrying your suitcase and you can no longer carry your suitcase? What happens if you're incapacitated? Have you ever seen what happens when you go into a court and somebody's trying to appoint a conservator or a guardian for somebody? I've been there, done that. I used to be a court-appointed guardian for folks. I worked at a guardianship firm, and you're talking about a stack of paperwork to try to get somebody to be a conservator of somebody who can't care for themselves, versus it needs to be in writing. Well, guess where it's in writing? Right here. What about medical? What if I can't make a medical decision for myself? Remember during COVID where they had these do not resuscitate? If I did not have somebody designated to advocate for me, that was the rule. They could push back against it. It's called a medical power of attorney. Is that included here? No. Is that included here? No. Is that included here? Yes. It's included because it's during your lifetime. It's a medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney, general power of attorney. How about all of the things that I own? Hey, I have this beautiful will that needs to be probated, but guess what? It's a public record, everything I have. And guess what else? Most people, when they do the will, they don't really think about the assets that they have and what kind of sentimental value. And there's no prohibition against the kids fighting each other. So there was a great case out of Georgia where two kids were going to loggerheads over about a $3 plastic Tweety bird. They wanted to go to trial over it. We've seen cases where we spent over $5,000 doing motion practice over Christmas plates. Because there's no prohibition here. Is there a prohibition against doing that here? Yes. And is there a separate trustee who gets to decide who ultimately gets it? Yes. So we can avoid that nonsense. You want to see families tear each other apart. The best way I ever had this put to me was through a probate lawyer. It says, you want to see the best people on their worst day, acting the worst that they could possibly have in a negative situation, put them through the probate process. You want to see good people act bad, go there. Because there's grief, there's money, there's fear of loss, there's all sorts of emotion boiling up, and you put them into a boxing ring and said, let's go at it. Rarely are those situations super nice and super sweet. There's always an emotion, there's always a negative. That's why I say, avoid this if you can. If you know anybody that's thinking about this, and they go to the lawyer and the lawyer says, hey, it's only for big estates, just remember that's only one aspect of it. They're looking at it from a dollar and cent standpoint, not a time standpoint, not an emotion standpoint, and then definitely not looking at what goes on during their lifetime before that standpoint. They're ignoring that entirely. And what they're doing is they're putting their wallet in your pocket. I'll use an example. If I walked, let's say that you called up ADT, home security, and you said, hey, I really would like an alarm in my house. And they walked into your house, and they looked around, and they said, you don't need an alarm. In fact, you should open up your doors and window and hope that somebody comes in here and steals some of this crappy stuff you have. Right? Would they ever do that to you? Would they ever sit there and say, nah, you don't need a security system? Why not? Because their job is to protect your home, and it's protect you and your home. It may not just be the value of your stuff, but it's the value of you. I do not know why my fellow attorneys will go out there and immediately look at the economic substance of the will and just say, hey, you know what, we could do the will. I'll just charge you $500. It's so cheap, whatever, da 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 da. And oh, probate's not a big deal. We'll cover it afterwards. There's so much more to this. There's avoiding that heartache. There's avoiding that things that happen to you during your lifetime. There's making sure you have advocates during your lifetime, both medical and financial. And there's the avoiding the harm that will happen to your family if they have to run through that probate process. When I do these as live events and I'm talking to people out there, invariably, there's multiple parties that said, this is what happened in my family, and we've never recovered as a result. There's so many people that have horror stories from their probate process. And so you have to put in something that has teeth that says you are disinherited if you contest. And you can do that in that trust. You can make sure that there's somebody else designated who can be the adult in the room that can help and make sure that this thing's fostered through, and we can keep adversarial actions to a minimum and a lot of boiled up emotions to a minimum, and we can keep the lawyers on the sidelines so that they're not the stars of the transaction. Again, when you go to court, rarely are there winners, even though maybe there's plaintiff and a defendant, and even if that plaintiff in theory wins, usually it's the two lawyers that won and everybody else lost. And so we want to avoid that courtroom like the plague. And that, my friends, is the reasons why I say everybody needs a trust. And I'm going to throw one last thing out at you, because some of you guys are saying, I don't have an estate. Some of you guys are thinking, I don't have that much money. Like, again, let me just put it to you this way. If you have 100 grand worth of assets and you're in California, you're paying $8,000 to probate. A trust isn't even close to that. But let's just say that, all right, I'll take it. You're not worth a ton of money right now in your mind. Insure your life. If you want to create a legacy, if you want to create something for your family, all you have to do is get term insurance, get some cheap term insurance, and name your living trust as the beneficiary. And now you can implement your legacy. And your trust can do things like say, hey, it's really important to me that you get a 4-year degree from an accredited university, if that's your thing. Or maybe it's, I really do want you to travel outside the United States. I want you to see other cultures. Maybe that's your thing. And you want to give your descendants that right. So maybe you want your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, all to have that ability. All right, get a term life policy on yourself, name the trust, and there, your legacy is cemented. And if you want people to remember you in your family, when you give them something that's not just, hey, I left you some plates or some of this or that or the other, but you give them something of real value, of your values, they're going to remember you a lot better than somebody who just left them 10,000 bucks, right? If there's something there that says, hey, you know what, somebody took the time to actually create a legacy, that's something people pay attention to. And I don't know about you, but if my grandparents or my great-grandparents had left me something that says, hey, Toby, I want you to go travel the world, I want you to go see Paris, I want you to go see Rome, I want you to go see London, I want you to go to Dubai, go to Istanbul, I want you to go travel, I want you to go down to Bogota, I want you to go to Cartagena, I want you to go to Chile, I want you to go to and see these other cultures and these other countries. I would have taken note to that. And I think that if you have beneficiaries, that they will too. So anyway, that's it. If you like this type of content, please down in the comments, give me your stories that you have, that you've experienced in probate. Let me know whether you have any of those horror stories. I'm always interested in hearing them, plus other people can read about it too. If you've actually been touched by it, please put it down in the comments. And if you know anybody who would benefit from this, please share it with them. And then as always, please like and subscribe. It helps us reach with our reach and how many people can actually see this type of content and benefit from it. Thank you.